Greetings, fellow humans. I'm MartianBuu, and today we're going to review the Warlock, Death Knight, and Shaman cards from Showdown in the Badlands, and then I'm going to show you a theory craft I came up with for each of those classes. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So Death Knight is one of the classes that got Excavate. Half the classes got Excavate support and the other half got a Highlander card. That's kind of how they split it. Excavate gets you a random treasure from a specific tier. So it starts off at common, then it goes to rare, then it goes to epic, and then it goes to a legendary as long as you're excavating within one of the Excavate supported classes. There are a couple neutral ones, so any class can excavate, but only the classes with Excavate support actually have a legendary treasure to find, and the legendary payoffs are ridiculous. The Death Knight legendary payoff is the Azurite Rat. So you resurrect your highest cost minion, give it +2/+2, reborn, and lifesteal. So for a 4 mana 5/5, that's a pretty good effect. Reap What You Sow is 3 mana, Frost Rune, deal 3 damage, excavate a treasure. The common tier ones are all really cost efficient, so the first time you use this card, it's going to be pretty good. But yeah, it's 3 mana for deal 3 damage isn't anything to be super excited about, but you do get that treasure, which kind of sweetens the pot. Obviously, these have to be played together. Then we have Skeleton Crew, which is a 4 mana 3/3 undead. Battlecry, excavate a treasure, it costs 0. So this is where memorizing the treasure pool is going to come in really handy, because you're going to want to time your Skeleton Crew. You're probably always going to try to play this as your 4th one. You definitely don't want to play it as your 1st, right? Because those ones are all cheap. You don't want to discount a 1 cost thing to 0. You want to discount, ideally, the legendary one to 0. So you'll try to use Reap What You Sow and some of the neutral ones as your first 3, and then on the 4th excavate, use Skeleton Crew so that you can play Azurite Rat for nothing. I'm pretty sure that this is the best excavate card that any class has gotten so far. We have some for Warlock we're going to talk about in a bit, but this is really strong. 4 mana 3/3, and then you make the treasure cost 0. Then we have Harrowing Ox. Speaking of things that cost 0, so 7 mana 7/7 taunt. Battlecry, if you've excavated twice, your next card this turn costs 7 less. So this is basically a free 7/7 taunt on turn 7 if you have an excavate heavy deck. It's got Frost Runes, so that's going to let you play Sindragosa or Frostworm's Fury in the same turn. Seems really strong in standard. I expect this, or maybe just the whole package, to get nerfed at some point. I don't know. In Wild, we have Brands, so we could on 10 do this and get the double discount to discount something by 14. I don't know how useful that is, but we could do it, I guess. It's important to note that while some of these cards are double runed, only one of them that we're going to go over has 2 runes of the same cost. So these are all, I think, intended for the most part to go in a rainbow DK. You can excavate in Pure Frost, you can excavate rainbow, mostly in standard, but it could be that this package is strong enough to see some play in Wild too. And then the final excavate card is Pile of Bones. So it's a 2 mana 2/1, Death Rattle. The next time you excavate, resummon this. So this is going to be a cool way to get some extra corpses and just some extra board presence. So you play this on 2, trade it off, or your opponent pings it or something. And then when you play Reap What You Sow, you get to get it back, and then it'll die again. And when you play a Skeleton Crew or something else, you'll get it back again. So playing one of these early means you're going to have a lot of very free value as the game progresses. And I think that's a pretty cool effect. And this being a Frost Unholy card means it's going to be almost exclusively used in Rainbow DK. The Plague package from last expansion was initially Unholy Frost. So if they had remained so, it probably would have become an Unholy Frost Plague deck. But since the plagues were changed to be more flexible, you might see an Unholy Frost Plague deck, but considering Helya is only 1 Unholy, I imagine you just put it all into Rainbow DK and see how that goes. Then we have Fistful of Corpses. It's 1 mana, it costs a blood and an unholy rune. Deal damage to a minion equal to your corpses. So you probably have to have about 3 corpses before you think that this is good. That isn't too hard to do if you haven't played one of your big corpse payoffs yet. And given that this is a multi-rune color card, you're probably not going to have a lot of your corpses spent yet, because the corpse spenders outside of triple runes are pretty bad. It looks like we're pushing Rainbow DK with this expansion expansion, so this obviously slots right in. You do want to use a lot of your corpses to power up Climactic Necrotic Explosion, but the corpse spenders before this set at least are pretty meager, so early you might be able to get this off, but it could be that it's a little bit too situational, see real play. This is always standard in mind. I don't super see a wild archetype with DK this expansion. Then crop rotation, 3 mana for summon 4 1/1 undead with rush that die at the end of the turn. It is a single unholy spell. I think this card's really good. This one doesn't let you just play it to have the bodies though. They will all die, so it's kind of a removal card slash get some corpses card. If you want corpses, this is going to be super duper good. I expect this to see a lot of play. Then we have Corpse Farm, 3 mana, unholy rune, spend up to 8 corpses to summon a random minion of that cost. This is, I think, the first rainbow DK corpse spender that's going to be pretty good. If you can get a lot of corpses early in order to play this, I think it's pretty great to have an 8 cost card, even if it's kind of random. But Rainbow just really needed something to do with their corpses in order to power up C&E, so this will be helpful for that. And then we have Farmhand, which is the only not Rainbow DK card of this set. 3 mana, 4/3 undead, battle cry, discover an undead, quick draw, it costs 2 less. So quick draw is if Farmhand entered your hand this turn by way of draw, discover, or a bounce effect, the quick draw is active. So if you got this off the top, the undead you will discover cost 2 less. Pretty good, especially considering the 3 mana 2/4 that conditionally discovers an undead and reduces its cost by 2 sees a lot of play. So if you're playing a primarily unholy deck, as long as you play this the turn you draw it, you get to discover the undead just like you would with the other one, but this has slightly more stats. It's not even, so I don't really see a place for it in Wild. Then we have Ma and Pa, which is a 4 mana 1/8 legendary. At the end of your turn, gain 5 corpses. At the start of your turn, spend 5 corpses to give your hero +5 health, and it requires a blood and unholy rune. Another Buu DK card. But yeah, I think this is another thing that's meant to kind of enable Climactic Necrotic Explosion. Not only does it give you a lot of corpses, but it does help you spend them if it sticks, and at 8 health, maybe it will. Given that it's multicolored runes, it's gonna be hard to fit it in anything serious outside of Rainbow DK, but its effect is pretty interesting. I do wonder if it's a little bit too low impact, because it really is not a threat on its own, right? You can't play it when you're behind and expect it to stick, because your opponent can trade into it kind of for free, given how low its attack is. But it's definitely an interesting card. And then we have Reska Pit Boss. So 20 mana, Frost Unholy card. Rush costs 1 less for each minion that died this game. That is your and your opponent's minions. Death Rattle, take control of a random enemy minion. It is a 6/3 undead. So again, Frost Unholy, it's probably only going to be able to be played in Rainbow DK, but it could go in the theoretical Unholy Frost Plague DK if you're building that with your Excavate cards. The thing that makes this really good with Excavate is it's going to be your highest cost minions when you use Azurite Rat. If you've played this already, you're always going to get it back. It is somewhat of a slightly scuffed Sylvanas in some respects, just because like the Sylvanas, you get to keep the stats on the Sylvanas and you get to target the minion you steal, but this can be free and it doesn't discount like Infuse's discount. It discounts like Corridor Creeper discounts. So you're going to get this discounted by your opponent's minions dying too. So I do expect this to cost pretty cheap by the mid to late game, probably 0. Overall, I think that a lot of these effects are really cool, and I really like the design on a lot of these cards. The rune requirements for them takes the wind out of my sails a little bit. I'm almost really excited for the Excavate package, but it requires Frost and Unholy. If it were just Frost and I could run like a triple Frost build with it, I'd be a little more stoked on it. But the cards are there to play Frost Unholy with Excavate, so you're not super limited to going all in on Climactic Necrotic Explosion. I would be more excited to build a C&E deck if the Corpse Spenders were there, right? So we get one in this set. It's pretty random and it might be good enough, but even then we only have 1 Corpse Spender, so we're gonna have to stretch a little bit to supplement that. So anyways, a lot of really cool ideas in here. I love a lot of these cards. I just wish the rune system wasn't so limiting. So I don't expect this to be any good at all, but it looks pretty fun. This is what I came up with to play the new cards in Wild. I don't want to make a standard deck and just play it in Wild, so in order to wild it up, I ended up making it Reno. Normally I don't need a reason to make something Reno, obviously, you guys know I like that, but generally in Wild for Death Knight, it's been if you can't even it, you gotta Reno it to make it seem like a wild deck, you know what I mean? Give it that wild spice. So here's my mostly standard deck plus a couple of Highlander cards. We do have all the Excavate cards, and I put some in the ETC. I have Reap What You Sow in here, I have Skeleton Crew in here. The reason that they're both in here is that way if you want removal, you can take Reap. If it's about to be your 4th Excavate, you can take Skeleton Crew, or just generally because Skeleton Crew is kind of the nutty one. If you have Bran out on the field, you can pick both. Corpse Farm is in here because it's our most efficient corpse spender, so ETC gives us an access to a second one. Rune of Darkness is in here just to be another way to get corpses. Pretty much everything that costs corpses is just in here for that reason, like Defrost, because we need a lot of corpses to make Climactic Necrotic Explosion work. The big thing that Wild has on standard regarding Climactic Necrotic Explosion is Arcane Dynamo, which lets you discover a spell that costs 5 or more. There are so few spells that cost 5 or more that Death Knight has access to that you're pretty likely to get offered Corpse Explosion. And if you have Corpse Explosion, you can just vent all of your corpses easy peasy. Other than that, there's not much to say about this deck. It's just the best of the Rainbow Death Knight cards to have a Wild Reno Rainbow DK. All right, heading over to Shaman here, we have Cactus Cutter, 2 mana 2/2 Murloc, draw a spell. If you cast it this turn, gain +1/+2 and taunt. This is pretty interesting, especially if you have only like one spell that you actually want to get. Lets you tutor it cheaper than Primal Engineer, and if it's a cheap spell or if it's later on in the game, then this becomes a 2 mana 3/4 taunt, which is really good. I could see a deck where you run just like Wind Chills, Cold Storage, maybe Invocation of Frost in Wild, and expect to be able to play this on 3 along with whatever you pull in order to freeze and get this effect every time. But even Ice Fishing, right? If you're going to play like a Murloc deck, so if you're going to play a full-on Murloc deck, you could run Ice Fishing as your only spell and just play this on 4 knowing that your spell is going to be Ice Fishing, get your 3/4 taunt and your Ice Fishing. Then we have Minecart Cruiser. There's an elemental theme with these Shaman cards and this set. Minecart Cruiser seems like a pretty good one. So it's a 3 mana 4/5 elemental, Rush, Overload 2, and Battle Cry. If you played an elemental last turn, don't overload. So this even seems like just a decent card overall. Overload 2 is kind of brutal generally, and we've seen them really tone down cards that have it. But this gives you the option to play other elementals and not worry about the overload whatsoever. And especially in Wild, where we have all those extra options, this is pretty much guaranteed just to be a 3 mana 4/5 rush with no downside. What's also nice is you can use Pebbly Page to tutor this in Wild. You'll have played an elemental the turn prior and have this on 3 more often. Then we have Living Prairie, which is a 5 mana 5/4 elemental. Battlecry, if you played an elemental last turn, summon 2 3/3 cows with Rush. So this thing's throwing cows at people. It's pretty funny. Generally a pretty good effect. I would assume that this ends up being a really good card in Standard. I don't know about Wild, but maybe. Then we have Walking Fountain, which is a 9 mana 4/16 elemental with Rush, Lifesteal, and Mega Wind Fury that overloads too. This thing is super big and super lifestealy, so if you get this down, you just kind of beat aggro on the spot, clear their whole board. It probably survives because its health is enormous, and then your opponent's staring at 16 damage coming at their face the following turn. At first glance, it's a pretty obvious big Shaman card, but the problem is Muckmorpher hitting this is pretty unimpressive. So if there's a list out there that cuts Muckmorpher so that you can run lower cost cards too, you could maybe do that. You could also just take the low roll on Muckmorpher so that you can play Call and Eureka to get this out. I can't imagine a big Shaman isn't going to at least take this as a low roll on Muckmorpher, given how strong it is with the other cheat cards, but we'll have to see how that looks. But yeah, this looks nuts in Big Shaman. I don't really see it in anything else. I wonder if Standard can just play this on 9. Then we have Amphibious Elixir, restore 5 health, discover a spell, nature spell. It just seems like a priest card. But yeah, Shaman might like this. 2 mana for restore 5 health is whatever, but you also get to discover a spell, so kind of ends up being the mana up version of Renew. And Renew saw a lot of play in Standard and is still kind of niche and wild, depending on your Reno Priest build. This can be drawn by Primal Dungeoneer, but given Ice Fishing and Cold Storage, people don't really run Primal anymore. I don't expect this to see a lot of play, but I won't be surprised if it ends up seeing play somewhere. Then we have Dehydrate. So 3 mana, Lifesteal, deal 4 damage to a minion, quick draw, cost 1. So up until just a couple weeks ago, Tidal Surge was this exact card without the quick draw. But Tidal Surge was very recently buffed to deal 5 damage instead of 4. So this isn't just a strictly better Tidal Surge. The quick draw is interesting, so sometimes it'll cost 1 instead of 4. If you draw that turn 3 or 4 or 5 or something like that against an aggro deck, I think that you'll probably have a target and you'll probably benefit from the lifesteal. And if you draw it on turn 1 or 2, obviously it's gonna cost full. This one isn't even a nature spell, so I'm having a hard time imagining it somewhere on purpose, in Wild anyway. It's cool that it works with Zentimo, but the fact that it only works well with Zentimo when it's top decked makes me think it's a filler card. Then we have Trusty Companion, 2 mana, forgive a minion +2/+3. If it has a minion type, draw one of that type. So if you like Even Shaman, here is here's a really good Even Shaman card. So you'll play your totem on 1, then you'll play this, and you'll get to draw a totem. Or you can play Ancient Totem with this on turn 2 if your opponent clears your turn 1 or something like that. Just a really, really good card for that deck. I can't really imagine it in anything else. The problem with elementals is you need to curve out with elementals every single turn for the whole game because of the elemental payoff, at least in Standard. And even if you're not using the elemental payoff, it's a legendary. We'll talk about it in a sec. You don't want to be not playing an elemental anyway, so it's tough to find a place to play this just because Shaman elementals at least aren't quite as swarmy as some other minion types. You have to play pretty off curve to fit this into your elemental curve. If there's a Murloc Shaman deck, maybe you'd play this, but I do think that you keep it to Ice Fishing to guarantee you'll get Ice Fishing off the other one. Maybe this is good enough though, just because you can still play the Murloc on 4 and know that you'll be able to play this, and then you'll just draw 1 Murloc and have more immediate board impact. Okay, I talked myself into it. That sounds pretty good. So yeah, I guess Murlocs and Totems for Shaman, you could play this and be pretty happy about it. I don't think we're there with Pirates or Elementals, but maybe. The other thing about Elementals is, again, Primal Engineer. If you are going to go with an elemental kind of swarm deck in Wild, your spells you'd want to be nature so that you can still draw the elemental. That is if Primal Engineer is even worth playing in elemental Shamans anymore. Kind of crazy to see how far that card's fallen off given how good it was at the time. But anyways, Trusty Companion seems nuts. We know it'll see play in Even Shaman, and it has the possibility to pop up in other Shaman archetypes as they pop up. Then we have Giant Tumbleweed, nature spell. Deal 6 damage to all minions. Summon a 6/6 Tumbleweed. Pretty good if you want a 7 mana clear. In Wild, I don't know that we're doing a 7 mana clear, but it's pretty cool. Just having a 6/6 that doesn't do anything else like Rush or Taunt, I don't know that that's great, but it's a pretty cool card. I bet this has a possibility to see some play in Standard at least. All right, and then we have the legendaries. So Scar the Catastrophe is a 7 mana 7/7 elemental. Deal 1 damage to all enemies, improved by each turn in a row you've played an elemental. This chain does break. It's not like count the number of consecutive turns you've had. It's consecutive from when you played this. So like if you played 5 elementals in a row and then you skipped a turn and played 2, this is going to deal 2 damage, not 7 damage. So it's going to be pretty tough to get this to be huge. You need to curve out every turn prior to this. Even in Standard, I don't know how consistently they're going to be able to pull that off, but in Wild, the type of deck that would pull this off, I don't know that it stands a chance, to be honest. I love the concept. I think it's really cool. And the payoff is huge, right? Like, say you get this. So it says each turn in a row you've played an elemental. So when you play this, you've played an elemental. So I assume it counts the turn that you've played it. So if you did manage to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, on 7, you're wiping the board and dealing 7 face damage and developing a 7/7. I think that's pretty good. It's just, those first 6 turns of curving out with elementals have to have been pretty good for you not to have lost by then. Then we have Dr. Holiday, which is another Highlander card. So 5 mana, 4/5. If your deck has no duplicates, equip the Staff of 9 Frogs. So the Staff of 9 Frogs is a 5 mana 2/9 weapon. After your hero attacks, summon a 1/1 frog with taunt. Each frog is bigger than the last. Hilarious card. Not the type of thing that I really look for in a Highlander effect, but it's pretty funny. So you'll get about halfway through this thing before you play your Showdown to follow it up, and then you'll start your frogs over, I'm pretty sure. You could green skin, or there's a 1 mana 1/1 that gives a durability from a set or two ago. I forget what it's called. So you could get the forbidden 10/10 frog off of this if it goes that high. If you manage to swing out for 10 turns following this this legendary. But anyways, is this any good? I think the weapon is pretty sweet, right? So you play this on 5 and you have a 4/5 as well as a weapon and a 1/1 taunt, which is a lot of value in one card. And then each turn after that you're making a bigger free taunt. So theoretically several turns of taunts would help you against something like Questline Druid or Kingsbane or Even Warrior. Anything that cares about attacking, your opponent will have to remove a taunt and also hit you in the face to be able to keep pushing damage for 9 turns. It's not nothing, but it's not insurmountable either, so you're not immediately safe as soon as you play this. But yeah, it's not like the most broken Highlander card I've ever seen, but I do think it's more than good enough to play in any Reno Shaman that you would build. So overall, I think that Shaman got a pretty interesting set. I'm hoping the elemental thing ends up being all right in standard. I think it'll be fun to build something in wild with the elementals, but I don't expect it to be very good. Dr. Holiday is pretty sweet. I'm a big fan of Reno Shaman. I expect that to see play there by me and many other people. Obviously, even Shaman's getting an upgrade. That card is really good for that deck. For the Theorycraft deck, I wanted to have something that wasn't just me putting Dr. Holiday in my current build of Reno Shaman. If you're curious about that, there will be a video sometime in the next week. But I didn't want to just like have one new card, Dr. Holiday, in my current Reno Shaman list, and I didn't want to have one new card in current even Shaman builds. I didn't think that was very interesting. So what I came up with is a Scar the Catastrophe Reno Elemental Shaman. This is meant to be spicy. It's not meant to like take your local meta by storm, but we have all these like cheapy elementals and some nice packages in here in order to make sure we can maintain that elemental chain. Reno, Shudderwock, and Primal Engineer are our only non-elementals, and we have enough cheapy things that hopefully we can manage to play one of them in the turn that we play those non-elementals. Oh, and then there's also Dr. Holiday too, but same thing. Very small handful of minions that aren't elementals. So our goal is to curve out with elemental cards and kind of stay in the game that way, and finish our opponent off with a big Scar or a Scar into Shudderwock for big damage. Ungoro recently got huge buffs, so a ton of the old elementals are better. Blazecaller and Calamos are a mana down. Stone Sentinel is 2 mana down. It ends up being like a slightly worse Living Prairie at 5 because it's giving you 2/3 taunts instead of 3/3 rush, but that has its own utility against things like Questline Druid. So if you want to try out some new elementals in wild, you want to try out the new Highlander card, here's my attempt at a fun Theorycraft deck. And then finally we have Warlock, which has the most interesting set of the 3 so far. Warlock is another Excavate class, so they don't have a Highlander card, they have an Excavate package. The Excavate legendary treasure is ridiculous. So Azurite Snake, 4 mana 5/5 elemental beast. Battle Cry, your hero steals 10 health from the enemy hero. This works the ridiculous way you think it does. It lowers your opponent's max health by 10 and increases your max health by 10. So you're pyroblasting your opponent while healing for 10 yourself and making it so that your opponent can't just heal that 10 back. What a ridiculous token. So the fact that this is a legendary Excavate card is what keeps it from being ridiculous, right? Probably is still ridiculous, but imagine you could just put that in your deck. My goodness. This thing is nutty. It gets around armor, it gets around ice block because you're not dealing damage, you're stealing health. Armor is not health, and ice block prevents damage. So a deck built to maximize Azurite Snake has some very interesting advantages in current wild, but we have to excavate at least 4 times and trigger the effect of the snake at least 3 times. So it's up in the air how powerful that's going to be, but we do have some interesting cards to consider when we build that deck. So first off, for the Excavate stuff, we have Smokestack. It's a 1 mana Fel spell that's important for Grave Defiler, which copies a Fel spell in your hand. Deal 1 damage to a minion. If it dies, excavate a treasure. So this is a really good, cheap Excavate spell, and it's the best Excavate card that Warlock has access to. So Grave Defiler is going to be nice to get extra copies of this, and especially running it with Grave Defiler, we have a target. So if your opponent's not putting out things that can die to the Smokestack, you can just target your own Grave Defiler with it. That's pretty good. Then we have Moarg Drill Fist. So 4 mana, 4/5 demon with Taunt. That's pretty good. And then Death Rattle, Excavate a treasure. So this does have Tamsin's Phylactery possibilities as far as like excavating a whole bunch of treasures at once. If you build it that way, it's going to end up being like a worse Mine Warlock, but maybe it's more fun than that. The other thing is you can use Timeline Accelerator to tutor this thing and discount it. So if you wanted to incorporate that into your snake build in Wild, that's pretty interesting. I do think that the best Excavate builds are probably going to be just Smokestack and the 2 mana 1/1 neutral Excavate card, and just try to copy those with like Raise Dead and Grave Defiler to get your snake, and then copy the snake with things like Zola, Fizzle, and Bran. So Excavate is one of the themes for Warlock this expansion. The other one is Sludge. So 2 mana, 3/2, Battlecry and Death Rattle. Put a Barrel of Sludge on the bottom of your deck. We know from the neutrals what Barrel of Sludge is already. It's a 2 mana, 3/2 Fel spell that deals 3 damage to the lowest health enemy and will trigger when it's played or discarded or destroyed. So things that destroy are like Hemet from Ungoro would destroy everything in your deck that costs 3 or less, but like Altar of Fire, Immolate, and I think even if you overdraw, it's destroyed that way too. So that's the difference between destroy and discard when it comes to things like Barrel of Sludge. So this is Battlecry and Death Rattle. Put a Barrel of Sludge on the bottom of your deck. That's one on top to get hit by Altar of Fire, and one on the bottom to get hit by... There's a couple cards that go after the bottom of your deck that we're going to talk about in a minute. And it's a Death Rattle, so if there's any Death Rattle synergies, you can play off that. Then we have Sludge on Wheels. 3 mana Rush 1/5. Whenever this takes damage, get a Barrel of Sludge and add 1 to the bottom of your deck. So you're getting 1 in your hand and you're getting 1 on the bottom of your deck. Really good for discard synergies too, to have them in your hand. Overall, I think these Sludge cards are really good, and we could end up seeing them even see play in Wild. Now is when things get really interesting. So we have Furnace Fuel, 4 mana fire spell. When this is played, discarded, or destroyed, draw 2 cards. So with these cards we're about to talk about that destroy from the bottom of your deck, if this so happens to be there, you get to just draw 2 cards for free. If you're playing a discard deck with either just Chamber in hand, or you're playing like a full-on discard deck, Furnace Fuel gives you another really good discard payoff. But it seems to go really well with Fracking. I think this card is really good. You're going to play it in the Sludge deck, you're going to play it in the discard deck, and you're going to be really happy about it. The Questline Warlock that plays Expired Merchant, Chamber, and Hand of Gul'dan as its only discard package will almost certainly add this to it. As well as Fracking, 1 mana, look at the bottom 3 cards of your deck, draw 1, and destroy the others. So this is original tracking. Original tracking for Hunter didn't just discover a card from your deck. It would look at 3, 1 would go in your hand, and you would destroy the other 2. And that is not strictly worse than discovering a card, because this way you power through your deck. You get the 1 card that's most relevant to what you want to do at that point in the game, and you're destroying cards that you don't need at that point in the game. So you're powering through your deck and filtering cards that are most relevant to your matchup. So tracking has always been really good for that reason. And now Fracking does the same thing, except with the rest of your Sludge package, you're putting things on the bottom of your deck that specifically want to be destroyed. So you could be getting a good card and dealing 3 or 6 damage to the lowest health enemy minion when you play Fracking. Really good card with or without the Sludge. If you have Furnace Fuel in your deck and it just so happens to be on the bottom, that's nutty. You just get to draw 2 cards on top of the one you get for just playing Fracking. Just a really interesting, fun, probably powerful package. Then we have Trolley Problem. So 3 mana, discard your lowest cost spell, Summon 2 3/3 tramp cards with Rush. Quick draw, don't discard. This quick draw card is really interesting because it's not just this is strictly better if you drew it this turn. If you draw it this turn, you might wait to play it until the next turn deliberately because you want to discard a Sludge or a Furnace Fuel or in Wild Boneweb Egg or something like that on the following turn. 3 mana for make 2 3/3 tramp cards with Rush is a pretty good deal. So I could see a lot of especially standard Warlocks playing this and hoping to high roll it and being fine if it discards their lowest cost thing. But in Wild, I think it's most likely to see play in a discard deck if a tempo discard deck resurfaces. Then we have Waste Remover, 4 mana 7/7. At the end of your turn, destroy the bottom 3 cards of your deck. This seems like a very standard card to me. So like they'll play the Sludge deck. They'll try to put Sludges on the bottom of their deck to waste remove. And this will be really good with Forge of Wills. So they'll play this on 4 and they'll get to copy it without having to run the can't attack thing, or they'll play the can't attack one too, just so that they're more likely to have one. In Wild, I think this is much too basic. Then for the legendaries, we have Popgar the Putrid, 4 mana 2/6. Your fell spells cost 1 less and have life steal. Battlecry, get 2 barrels of sludge. So this obviously goes with the barrel deck. You'll probably play this in a discard deck. Being able to cast your sludge spells manually could be okay. It'll be nice to like stick this and then you don't have to rely on discarding to get the barrels out of your hand. The other fell spell that Discard Warlock plays is Fist of Jaraxxus, and I think you're not playing that even at 3 mana unless you like have nothing better to do. But maybe with Lifesteal you do it just because this is out. But anyways, Popgar is really interesting. Just the fact that it gives them Lifesteal I think is really cool, and the fact that it discounts the fell spells means it synergizes with itself. You don't necessarily have to be playing a sludge deck to play this. You could just play it and pop one of them on turn 5, heal up a little bit and destroy a ship's cannon or something. Good card. We'll see play in anything sludge related and maybe more than that. Then we have Tram Conductor Jerry, something like that. 7 mana 4/4 Battlecry. If you've excavated twice, summon 6 3/3 tram cars with Rush. This reminds me of Militia from Scalomance, except it's much easier to get all 6 3/3s. In Standard, obviously if you're excavating you're going to play this, but in Wild I feel like we're so turbo focused on getting our first Azurite Snake and copying it as much as possible to get our opponent before they get us. I don't think we'll have time to play this necessarily. I had it in my initial build, but then the remaining Warlock cards were revealed and I saw the discard package. So we'll talk about that in a second. Really interesting card. It could be good enough for Wild. I think depending on how you built your Excavate deck, this definitely goes in, but the way I've built it, it doesn't. So yeah, the Warlock set is really cool. I'm actually super excited for all of these things. We have a discard archetype, we have a questline Warlock that's turboing through its deck with the destroy cards, and we have Excavate, which is what I'm most excited for, to play that snake a bunch. I want to get through an ice block with it so bad. So here's my theory craft for it. So for this, like I said, I had the Tram Conductor in initially. I also had Tamsin Hero in initially, but then when I saw Furnace Fuel, I wanted to do the Chamber of Viscidus Hand of Gul'dan thing. So for that, we run Expired Merchant, so we can't run any other 6s or 7s, so I cut those. The idea here is to draw through your deck and get the cheap Excavate cards as fast as possible. So we're going for Kobold Miner, which is the 2 mana 1/1 that excavates, and we have Smokestack, which is the 1 mana fell spell that deals 1 and excavates. Grave Defiler will copy it and also give you a target. We have Kobold Librarian for a target. We can use Raise Dead to get more Defilers and more Kobold Miners to get more Excavates that way. And then once we've gotten a Snake, we can either play it, have it die, and Raise Dead. We can play it and Zola. We can also play it and Fizzle to get one in the snapshot for later. I think Fizzle is going to be kind of important if mirrors show up, just because you need to be able to like kind of go infinite with it to win in the mirror if you're both at a pace. So obviously if one gets it super fast, they're just gonna kill the other one. But if you're in a mirror, you're gonna be stealing the health back and forth multiple times. So having the Zola Fizzle set up to win that race will mean you guys can go to time and enjoy that. Finding the right removal package was a little tough. So there's Defile, which is really good against pretty much just Pirate Rogue these days. So depending on how much Pirate Rogue shows up, maybe we want to get a Defile in here. Even Shaman, unless it's a bot playing it, probably isn't going to give you a clean defile. Plague of Flames is good, but we maybe don't have the cheap minion count necessary to guarantee a good Plague of Flames. I thought that Chaotic Consumption is going to be better against a Giants deck unless they have a giant board of Giants. So like if you're up against several Giants, it's probably not going to do it anyway. But if your opponent has 1 or 2 Giants, I think Chaotic Consumption is better because sometimes they'll have some other smaller things with it too, and this way you get to actually pick which one goes down. But like fitting all the Warlock removal isn't possible in 30 cards while also fitting the whole discard draw package. And I really wanted to showcase that because it's so much new stuff, and I think it'll actually be good. Definitely in Questline Warlock, the discard draw package is going to be really good. But you could cut the discard draw package, put in Backfire, Tamsin, and Tram Conductor Jerry if that's the route you wanted to go with it. And that way you'd have room to put in some more removal too. So far, this is the deck I'm most excited about, and unless something more exciting reveals itself, I'll probably play this first. All right, that wraps up the Death Knight, Shaman, and Warlock review. Let me know in the comments if you're excited for these classes, if you liked any of the Theorycraft decks I showed you, what your opinions are on the cards overall. Remember to like and subscribe to support the channel, and thank you so much for watching.